new year, and we got an even newer update to the Warcraft 3 PTR patch notes. And it looks like a lot of these patch notes are reverting some of the changes that were maybe a bit too radical, which isn't necessarily bad, especially because we don't actually know how much follow-up there's going to be, like if there's actually going to be further patches. So keeping the game stable and similar to what it is not necessarily bad, in my opinion. Of course, there are those who would like it to just completely shake up everything, and then we get more patches and it shakes it up again. But realistically, I don't think that's a thing that's going to get set up for Warcraft with how not popular the game is. But yeah, let's look into the changes. So they reverted the tavern revive cost, but alter heroes still have the 25 gold reduction. I mean, probably fine. There's still a little bit more value for alter heroes with that 25 cost. And you don't, I feel like making the revives too costly might be kind of bad because then you'll just never see it again. I don't know, maybe it's just fine. But this one's kind of weird, right? So the first thing they did, like probably one of the first patch notes they did, right back here, was Headhunters boosted to 160 gold and 30 lumber from 140 and 20. And now, after two more updates, the wood and gold cost of the Headhunter is the exact same. And now they just got a 2-second build time nerf, which to me is not significant enough, or at least not the change people wanted for Headhunters. I do think build time is maybe something people wouldn't mind it being changed, so they don't come out as quickly, but the fact that this is the only change to Headhunters seems pretty small. I still would have liked to see instead some of the damage locked behind an upgrade, and that upgrade either being the Troll Regen or the Tier 3 Berserker upgrade. So like take away, a couple of their early damage and then give it back later. I think that could have been good too. And maybe combine it with this. But like this by itself, this is so negligible by itself that Headhunters are still going to be used plenty. Now, there are some differences with the rest of Orc though. Blademaster mirror images still keep the damage and are getting it boosted to 15% instead of 10. I honestly don't really understand. I think mirror image is already good as is, but let's just tack on some damage as well. I guess they don't want to touch the base Blade Master, because if you make him stronger, then he'll just scale too well. He just gets too much advantage early with extra agi or whatever. So they want to touch one of his skills, and they're like, "Oh, let's do it for a mirror image. Give it a little damage." So I don't know, whatever. Maybe it's fine. I just feel like it's maybe unnecessary. It should say decreased from 25 to 15, but because their last change, I believe, was at 25, but whatever. It is still increased from 0. or their other change, which was 10. So whatever. I get it. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's. I don't think this damage is needed, but maybe they want it to be used more. Great Hall build time reduced. Technically increased from the last patch. They reduced it from like 150 to 130 or 35. Yeah, they put it to 135, and now they're just deciding, okay, let's put it back to 140. We don't want to increase it too much. I think that's good. 140 is still quite a lot of time, you know? So it's still the longest building expansion. I think it's fine. Brute strength bonus. So current state is 100. They were going to boost it to 150, and now they're thinking 125, which means it's still a buff. It's just less of a buff. Things like this could be a reason you might see more Blade Grunt play, but it is getting less significant, and the Headhunters are still good. So hard to tell exactly, but this does mean that Orc maybe has more options, you know, extra 25 health there. Headhunters just have build time increase, which is negligible. But this is a decent change, I think. Feral Spirit mana cost increased by 10. They did, however, reduce Chain Lightning mana cost by 10 as well. But Wolves are the main used spell. So they will be using more mana overall, generally. But this technically is a buff against human, right? Because that's a matchup where sometimes the orc will actually use Chain Lightning more so than wolves in the mid game, mid to end game, because the wolves get stolen. But they did change Breaker's control magic to tier 3, and I think that's still there because there's no revert here. So maybe we'll see more wolves still, and the wolves do cost more mana. I don't know. I think the change is fine though. It will slow down the Farseer a little in the early game now that he has 10 extra mana cost on top of 2-second Headhunter build time. But they're very small nerfs to something that's pretty strong. So I don't know. It's overall whatever. I think mostly Orc just gets more viability with strategies. They get better build time on their Hall, they get slightly more grunt HP, their Blade Master Mirror Image has some value. Headhunter Farseer still good. Was there other changes? Blades or whatever. Something else? There's mostly that. I think Orc is fine with these. Human Siege engines reverted. So tanks are usable. Wow. They do only attack structures again. I don't remember if there's any other changes that did make it through. Do they have +1 armor now? Hold up. Hold up. Wait a minute. So they reverted these things, okay. But they're like, oh wait. No, this is Spellbreak armor. Was there something else for human? Where is it? Siege engine. Barrage. Okay, it's just barrage. Okay. So they just got barrage damage increase. The rest is the same for siege engines though, right? The XP change. Bug. Yeah, I think it's just barrage. That's fine, whatever. I hate facing tanks, but you know, I guess it's a thing. Animal war training reverted to having castle requirement. I don't hate it. I do think actually what I would have liked to see is animal war training still being on keep, tier 2, but make it so sundering blades had to be researched again at tier 3. But maybe that's, I don't know, maybe that's too much or bad or something. Yeah, maybe make animal war training tier 2. Sundering blades has to be researched again on tier 3, but they can both have like slightly reduced cost as well or something to make up for it. Barrage's damage against air units, so it's negligible. It doesn't really matter. But they got +2 damage to air. They'll be good for maybe team like 4v4 games, right? Because a lot of people mass air in 4s. Tanks can just go in, kill buildings. If they try to kill it with their air, the barrage might slaughter them. But for solo, it doesn't really matter. You don't use siege engines against air in solo. Yeah, I don't know. I don't hate this getting reverted, but I do think there was maybe a different change that could have happened, like keeping this at tier 2 for war training, and then Sundering Blades tier 3 again rather than auto research, and then tweak the cost or something. I don't know. Orb of Fire. So they decided. Let's see. Was there other Orb of Fire damage changes? So they decided to keep staff as is, or as it was buffed earlier already. This is actually huge changes to human for tier 3. So staff still has the 50 gold buff, so it costs 50 less. Orb of Fire is 5 less damage, but 75 less gold. And I think humans are probably fine with that. Because if you don't have to spend. What was this before? Before it was 575, now you're spending 450. You get an extra 125 gold at the cost of 5 Orb of Fire damage. But the staff matters against other races too, if they ever actually get tier 3 against the other races. Orb of Fire, more negligible. It can have value against all the races, but is generally negligible. Yeah, tier 3 versus other races, dude. You see it in Mirror. I see it sometimes versus Elf. But usually if they have tier 3 versus Elf, the human's winning anyways, because it means the Elf went Archers and the Archers didn't end the game. So you do see tier 3 human against Elf when they go tank Knight Gyro, or not Gyro, Griffin. Tank Knight Griffin stuff, like Simmons used to play. That stuff was really difficult. I always got owned by it because he just gets he just lames wisps with like Panda second, and then he goes Paladin third, and then he has like some tanks. It's hard to deal with them, and then eventually he just gets so much staff value. And now, if staff is 50 gold cheaper, he's going to be saving even more units. Tank Knight Griffin, the tier 3 stuff. It's pretty difficult if you haven't ended the game before then. I don't know. I think the Orb of Fire change is good. I'm still a little worried about the staff because it is fairly cheap now with that 50 gold cheaper. But maybe it's fine. What's their other human changes? that. So they still got the breaker armor, reduced blacksmith cost, and peasant HP. Polymorph reduce. Okay, whatever. Mortar team HP. They got quite a few buffs. Peasant HP, mortar team HP. Blacksmith reduced cost. Staff reduced cost. Orb reduced cost. And then for nerfs, they got a siphon. At level 2 and level 3 siphon. Slight nerf. So now instead of sapping all your mana in 3 seconds, it saps all your mana in 3 to 4 seconds. I don't know. It's OP. I don't know. Humans getting a bunch of buffs. We'll see how it works. Because they're not getting buffs for certain things though, like rifles or Mountain King, or things like that. So I think the changes are probably fine. Things like Mountain King and rifle buffs could potentially just make human crazy strong if they get buffed too much, because those are the type of things that can just easily carry the game at tier 2. But like these changes, they're a bunch of small things, but they can add up. We'll see how it works. Yeah, humans will dominate me as well, because I'm already getting dominated by humans. So Night Elf, the mana drain from 5 to 6. It's currently 7, so it's still a buff. Damage. The overall damage goes from 10, 15, and 20 a second to this is essentially doubled because they have half the time between ticks. So it's 16, 24, 36 per second. So damage increased, mana drain is less. So Immolation is buffed overall by far, but still we'll see how it goes. I think my original suggestion, or one of the suggestions I mentioned, was something around like 6, 12, 18 or 8, 12, 16 or something. One of those. I can't remember which. But it seems like after a few weeks and feedback and all that stuff, Blizzard actually thought the damage numbers I was giving was a little too small. So they have even higher though. Unlike what certain human players were saying to me when I mentioned it. Like, oh, that's crazy, dude. But Blizzard, after all of this and all the feedback, has still decided this is fine. And I mostly agree. I'm still unsure about this level 1 one. This 16 damage a second or 8 every half second is maybe significant, combined with the mana drain reduction. But we'll see. This is obviously still negligible. So it's 36 damage a second, which is a lot, but Blink Fan and Haze Fire and things like that were already good enough to wipe peasants even quicker and more efficiently than Immolation. So against peasants, this does not matter. It does give Demon Hunter more viability to do something like that when he couldn't before, but it's like if that was the goal, Elf already had better tools anyways. So whatever. And against units, unlike Breath or Blink Fan, the Demon Hunter has to walk through to reach the backline and then be standing on top of the backline for this to affect, because the AoE is still small. So I think this is just fine. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it matters against other races, though, because I think this could actually be a thing against Orc. Is the real thing. So currently, Elf, if they're not doing Mass Tier 1 stuff with like Keeper Alchemist at like lower MMRs, it's something like Lores with Keeper Panda. And Panda essentially just AoEs down the Orc army over time and wins the game. This could do the same thing. However, you can't hit buildings with it, but you can go Demon Hunter first, Panda second, and have something like this. The hardest part to tell, though, is this good enough to where you forego mana burn? Or do you go like level 2 mana burn, level 3 immo, level 3 mana burn, level 2 immo, no evasion? Like, it's hard to decide what would actually be best here, but I think these numbers might work out. The question is level 1 and level 2 immo too strong at all? Or are they fine like this? Because level 1 immo is significant enough now that you might be able to do some damage with it against like peasants early. Because this, like I said, this is actually a pretty significant increase. So I don't know, maybe it'll be tweaked again. Maybe something more like I don't know. I don't know, maybe it's fine. Maybe it should be tweaked again. But if Keeper's still nerfed, maybe Elf wants this or needs this. DH Mass Hunts. Maybe. We'll see. The problem with Immolation still is you do still drain your mana. You have to decide, are you getting mana burn at all? And if you are you okay with completely draining your Moonwells? And after you've done your damage, does something like Human just not expand? Or do they expand and realize the Elf can no longer do a secondary push for a long time? Because after that first Immolation push, the DH goes back to their base and they have like no mana and their health has drained all the Moonwells, and now they can't attack again, but they can't creep well either, because if they creep, their wells are still dry. That was always my problem whenever I've done Immolation stuff. Like after you get out of the harass, you're stuck with not being able to do anything. Whereas Keeper, if you got, after your harass, you have enough mana from the wells to get another set of treants. You can start creeping again. You have ranged heroes, whatever. It's good. You can do stuff. But with Demon Hunter, if you have to go tank a camp again, it's a little awkward. So I don't know. Talons. Interesting. Change. So mana cost for Crow form reduced, which actually means something if it still has piercing. Does it still have piercing? I think it still has piercing, right? Yeah, so Talons might actually be a thing against like undead. That's about it. They might have some viability against undead, which I don't know if that's the race you want Talons to be viable against, because this seems like bad game design to have a caster that can potentially counter a anti-caster in the destroyer. I don't know, whatever. And then Druid of the Claw, starting mana reduced. I don't know if this means that they lose 25 mana on each upgrade again. I think it's just 25 mana total, right? So that they can more so do like rejuve roar morph rather than rejuve morph. I mean, they couldn't actually do rejuve morph. They had to like wait a few seconds, like 10 seconds. But it could make less rejuves. It's probably fine. The undead changes are weird though. So Lich suddenly gets its damage back, which okay. But instead they're nerfing damage cap and ritual cooldown. So the damage cap only really matters against elf, I would say, against either archers or hippos, or now talons, I guess, if talons are a thing. So for other races like human and orc, Lich is still very strong. But ritual does matter for matches against human. This 10-second longer ritual is pretty significant. I'm not sure if this is the right change rather than Nova itself, but it'll probably be helpful against human and in undead mirror. Against elf, I mean, honestly, a lot of undeads go Nova Frost Armor anyways, unless it's Lich first. So Lich is still really strong against elf. I mean, it's still really strong in general, but it's like same as it was against elf as before. I don't know. I don't know if this cap will matter. But the Haunted Gold Mine, instead of 120, it's now 110. It was originally 100, so it's still an overall nerf, but less significant of a nerf, which I think is fine. But I still think nerfing Nerubian would be better than this. And Nerubian is still untouched. So that's that, I guess. I don't know. Undead still does have the other nerfs, though, right? Like, they still have statue nerf and well, mostly the statue nerf. The other ones are negligible. So undead's actually not getting nerfed too much. Honestly, elf gets nerfed the most because keeper gets nerfed, ultra vision gets nerfed, mostly against orc. What else was nerfed? Druid of the Claw gets nerfed. And then Immolation, the least used spell in the game, gets a buff. So, yeah. Elf players in shambles. That was an old change and not current. The current one is ritual nerf, damage cap on Nova, which is generally negligible, except in niche scenarios. Gold mine, 10-second. So 10-second gold mine nerf, 10-second ritual nerf. Anti magic shell nerf, but that's the only thing on Banshees nerfed, so it's like whatever. Banshees are still really good. Um, what was the other change? Statue nerf. So the statue nerf is significant. That's mostly it. That's about it. It's like I think undead, happy in 120 is still going to crush everyone. This doesn't mean shit to them. Like this actually means nothing. This 10-second gold mine change mostly affects like 2k MMR and lower players. The top players don't rely on this expansion so much, you know. X Lord, Happy, 120, and whatever, they're winning without this expansion. So it's whatever. The ritual change affects them a bit, but Lich is still good. You know, Frost Armor is still good. Nova has all its damage. The damage cap is, like I mentioned, really only useful against like hippos or archers, and sometimes a mass of footman militia. But without the militia, there isn't actually more than 8 units there. So it's whatever, right? Yeah. Complete list. I've already looked through most of the list anyways, so and I remember most of the changes. So undead is still in a great spot, I would say. The nerfs mostly affect middle of the pack MMR undead players, I would say. The ones that rely on this ritual or this haunted gold mine timing. But overall negligible. This could still matter for them a bit, but it's, you know, it's not a Nerubian nerf. The damage is not really nerfed on Nova. And their other stuff's still good. It's whatever. Circlet toggle is reverted. I think that's good. I think the toggle is bad design for Warcraft. You don't want to have to toggle your item every single time you pick it up. And you pick up this circlet and suddenly you have to toggle it from 2 agi to 2 strength or 2 int or whatever each time. And it's like, that's just an annoyance. Wanda Mana Stealing was 50, buffed to 75, and now back to 65. I would say this is still strong at 65 in the early game. But later on, it's still maybe whatever compared to like a greater mana. So this might be a decent number. It's definitely better than 75 because 75 absolutely crushes early game. You know, 150 mana swing in the early game against like an expansion or something, like an elf creeping Tuskars and then harassing the human on Northern Isles. This is like 1 less water ellie and 2 more entangles, for instance. So I do think this is good to lower it back down. And 65 might be the right number, not sure. It's possible it still wants to go down to like 60, but I think 65 is fine. Like, even if it's pretty strong, it's not going to necessarily break the game, I would say. So, yeah. Changes I think they should do. I think they should nerf Nerubian towers and delete breakers. But that's more of just a personal preference on the breakers. But yeah, I think Nerubians should be nerfed. That would be the big thing. I mentioned it multiple times, but this haunted gold mine is currently 100 seconds, and moving it to 110, it does matter. But the fact is, if the Nerubian is still there and owning, you're generally still going to get this gold mine up anyways if you set it up. A lot of the times when a gold mine is canceled, it's during the first 20-30 seconds of it being set up anyways, right? There are some fringe scenarios where it's canceled towards the end, and this can matter, but it's more than Nerubian that's a huge problem. And just how strong Undead is early with ghouls, because ghouls are pretty good. One of the things that makes ghouls so good is afterwards they just get put on wood. They can heal on blight for free over time, and they're very good creeping early. So yeah, Undead still has plenty of tools early game to do things. This shouldn't matter too much. It's more than Nerubian that mattered. What do I think the nerf should be for Nerubian? And slow duration? Mostly slow duration? I don't know. That would make the most sense. They could nerf, or they could change multiple things on it if they wanted. But slow duration getting nerfed, particularly on heroes, I would say, would matter a lot. Because right now, you can switch the Nerubian between multiple targets, and they're just slowed forever. Just delete it. Delete Nerubians, delete breakers, call it good. Okay, so overall, after looking at this, Undead at top level is still just fine, I would say. I would say that this ritual nerf is less significant than damage on Nova nerf. I would say the haunted goldmine 10-second nerf is less significant than a Nerubian nerf or a 20-second goldmine nerf or whatever. So undead at top level should be just fine. Undead at lower levels, probably still all right. Orc overall buffed. There are some changes to Farseer, and Headhunter has 2 second more build time, but Farseer Headhunter is still going to be good. The wolves aren't going to necessarily break you with this extra 10 mana, especially with Chain Lightning being cheaper. And the 2 second build time can be negligible, because sometimes you hold off on building Headhunters anyways near tier 2 so that you can get your second hero or tech straight to tier 3 or get your production. So yeah, this matters for the third, fourth, fifth Headhunter maybe in the early game, but your Farseer's still there. He's still going to have his wolves doing playing damage. Orc's still going to be good. And then they got buffs. Great Hall buff, Brute Strength buff, Blade Master Mirror Image buff. I think Orc's pretty strong. Human overall buffed. The biggest question is the tier 3 buffs, particularly staff. I think the Orb of Fire one is fine. So it went from 7 to 10 and now back to 5 damage for Orb of Fire, but they reduced the cost by 75. I think that's just fine. But the other changes were, they got 1 breaker armor, reduced cost blacksmith, and 50 gold reduced on staff. I think this are fine changes. I'd prefer the breaker change to not exist, or breakers did not exist at all. But it's probably better to give breakers 1 armor than it is to give rifles damage, I guess. So it's fine. I think the human buffs are fine. They still have the peasant buff as well. Control magic is nerfed to tier 3. So even though breakers do get that 1 armor, they do lose control magic at tier 2. Which I think is a good takeaway. Like, give them a little something so they're tankier, but make them also not have utility against literally everything right at tier 2, right? Now they require tier 3 for control magic, but they still have feedback, they still have spell steal, they still have magic immunity. They're just fine. Plus 1 armor rifle. Oh no. Can you imagine paladin rifle builds with extra armor rifles? Those things never die. Okay. And they still got the mortar team buff, the peasant buff. So human gets quite a few buffs. Orcs get a couple buffs. Undeads get a couple nerfs, but not actually on the big things, right? Nova was not nerfed, besides the damage cap, which doesn't matter in most cases, because 8 units is still a lot. And then it's like ritual onto go. It's not Nerubian, it's not Nova damage. Like, I think undead, even though they got some nerfs, they're overall fine with this. And elf, though, elf gets hit quite a bit though. But they also get a couple buffs, right? Talons get a slight buff and viability against undead with piercing damage and less crowform cost. Or mana cost. Immolation is buffed for damage and mana drain. And tick time, so the damage is more consistent. But they get nerfs too, right? Druid of the Claw, mana nerf. Tranquility, huge nerf. Starfall doesn't really matter. Entangle, duration nerfed. Thornzara buff doesn't matter. Mountain Giants changed and probably weaker on tier 3, and they were already not used. Ultravision nerfed. I think the big thing is the keeper. Like, how big does the entangle duration change? Keeper stuff. Because the entangle duration also affects, you know, how much damage you do in the early to mid game. It might not matter late game, I guess, but entangle wasn't a problem late game generally anyways, because they have dispels by then. So I don't know. It's hard to tell where elf lies after this, because they are getting their other big hero, Demon Hunter, with that Immolation buff. And the question is, does Immolation matter enough? Or is it... those 10 HP peasants, dude, they might affect the Immolation burning the peasants now too, dude. Actually, does it affect the haze fire damage too? How much does haze fire damage do? By the way, because the peasant HP buff might affect that too. I used Immolation against a human, and I lost all my health, all my mana, and I killed like 1 peasant. It was great. I would say currently Immolation's only good if the camp's actually difficult and the elf arrives as the human starts the camp. Which, by the way, is how it should be, regardless of the hero. A human shouldn't be able to get a free orange camp in the face of the opponent. So, you know. It just, why doesn't human just start with 2 bases? XD. We need free expos. Put them behind our base so that they can't even be touched. The human way. But yeah, I would say overall undead and orc at the top, and then human elf below. I don't know who would be 1 and 2, or who would be 3 and 4. But undead and orc would probably still be 1 and 2, which I don't think is actually different from how it is now. But now it's actually easier for orc to be in that 1-2 spot. Before, like, I think orc was already in the 1-2 spot, but it was harder because they had a rough matchup versus elf. But the matchup's a little bit easier versus elf now. Entangle, ultravision, all that stuff nerfed. So yeah, I would say elf and human bottom, undead and orc top. Overall, the game doesn't change much. GG, it's over. That's the end of the patch notes. I don't know. If I had other nerfs, it would be Nerubian, Frost Nova damage instead of ritual, whatever. I think orc doesn't necessarily need some of the buffs they got, like a mirror image buff. But whatever. Yeah, that's mostly it. Honestly, as far as the patch goes, this is probably fine overall. If there's not planning to be lots of patches. Otherwise, if there was going to be lots of patches, I'm sure people would prefer the game to get changed up more than this. You know, you'd like to see big changes, and then a month and a half from now, another bunch of other big changes, and another month and a half, or 2 months, 3 months, whatever. And a bunch of big changes again. But that's just not going to happen. Warcraft is not going to get that much treatment, so a small change like this with some tweaks on things is probably good. And I think this is a step in the right direction. I'm a little unsure about some of the orc buffs, if they were required, but at the top level, I think it'll be undead and orc, and then elf and human. Unless Immolation proves to actually be really good, but I think it'll just be all right. It'll be usable, but it won't like break the game, right? Like elf already had access to Warden, had access to Panda, Pit Lord Cleave. Elf was already using other big AoE heroes, so I think it's negligible. That's my thoughts. Well, we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it